One Nation Leader Pauline Hanson. Thanks for joining us, Pauline. This economic news today, the jobless figures. You heard Brendan O'Connor there. We've been talking to others about the prospect, the possibility of bringing forward tax cuts, the tax cuts that have already been legislated. Is this an idea to stimulate the economy that you find attractive?
It would help stimulate the economy and put more money into the pockets of Australians and go out there to spend it. I think we're headed for a downturn in the economy in general. With the RBA reducing the interest rates, that's evident. That means to say the economy is not stimulated. People aren't spending the money. People are very concerned about it. They're actually wanting to pay off their mortgages because they don't want the banks repossessing their properties, hence they're not out there spending the money. So I think the economy's doing it tough, but I think there's other countries around the world doing it tougher than Australia.
Yeah, now, obviously the interest rate cuts are not stimulating the economy the way that it's intended, which is perhaps not surprising given the lack of confidence and how low interest rates are anyway. I suppose then you're left with two prescriptions that are on the table at the moment. One is where Labor are talking about, you know, spending a lot more money, increasing New Start, bringing forward infrastructure spending. Given we've already got a massive infrastructure pipeline in place, is perhaps this idea of bringing forward the tax cuts a more attractive option? Which do you prefer? Borrowing more to spend more or actually cutting taxes earlier?
It's part and parcel of the whole lot, right? What I would be doing is your infrastructure projects, which creates jobs in Australia. You have an asset at the end of the day. When you actually got cheap loans that we can get at the moment, the government can get it very, very cheap loans. That's where we should be investing money into the infrastructure now while we can get the cheap loans. Create the employment. That employment in turn will actually end up in the economy. I've said this all along. That's why I didn't want to do the corporate tax cuts of over $50 million turnover. And it's interesting that the head of the RBA agreed with me. The money must be put into infrastructure projects. And I think Peter Costello came out and also agreed with what I had said. But I was ridiculed at the time for having those views and ideas. Employment is what it's going to turn around the economy. If we still open up, and we're doing a free trade agreement at the moment with Indonesia, and we're talking about bringing in workers from overseas, you're talking about jobs in Australia. You've got the unemployable here. That's a fact. There are people out there you wouldn't want to employ, and there are people who don't want to work. I hear from farmers and different ones now, they've given up on the Australian people to actually pick the fruit because they won't do the job. So you're bringing in ones from overseas, the Asian countries, to come out here and pick the fruit. People have to be, you can't just sit on New Start allowance forever and a day. It is there as a helping hand. So we actually have to kickstart the people out there, get out and get a job. And I hear from so many businesses, they say, we want to employ people, but we can't get the people. And another thing the government needs to do is cut back on the red tape. States need to look at the payroll tax, because I know a lot of businesses who are tied up in the payroll tax want to employ more people, but the more they employ, the more taxes they're paying. There are solutions to this. If the governments would stop looking at how much money they can get in their own coffers and start looking at how we can kickstart the economy.
Well, there's a few things there. If you want to make it easier to employ people, especially the lower wages and the lower skilled jobs, payroll tax is one issue, unfair dismissal laws are another, and even compulsory superannuation. I mean, if you went the way some people are arguing and you made super voluntary on the lower wages, then that immediately increases those wages by 9%.
Don't agree with that, what you're saying about voluntary superannuation, because people actually have to have something to retire on. The way we're going, there's no guarantee that about 20 or 30 or 40 years down the track will we be in a position to pay out for pensions. People, you have to have an income. What I would like to see is, like the UK has a system where as you pay into a fund, we used to have it, but the government's raided that fund. That was going to be like a pension fund. So what you put into that fund through your working life, that's basically what you get out of it and what you retire on. Not these people who sit around, don't want to work, don't want to do anything their whole life, and everything's given to them and they retire on a pension. We have to have a fairer system to encourage people to want to go out to work, to actually better themselves in life. And our whole educational system is letting our people down, and it's shown in the statistics. The industry, manufacturing, That's been my argument all these years. Look what Donald Trump's done. He actually has stopped the trade coming in. He's increased the manufacturing and industry. He's boosted employment over there, and the country's powering along. Why can't we learn from these things?
I've got to get on to some other issues, but since we've ended up here, I just have to ask you about superannuation and, you know, it's 9% for most workers now, but is it fair that taxpayers pay 15% superannuation for public servants?
No, it's not fair. I've always said that. So you won't get an argument out of me. It's not fair. It's a huge cost to the taxpayer, the public servants. It doesn't matter whether you're a member of parliament or whether you work in the public service. I think it's unfair.
Yeah, no,
and it's unrealistic for us paying out. So make it level playing field with everyone in Australia.
Absolutely. There's so many in the public service, and we'll talk about having a level playing field, yet they get much better employment conditions and almost double the super their private sector countrymen get.
And Chris, what some of these department heads are on is just ridiculous. And it was because of me, about the former CEO of Australia Post, $5.6 million, nothing would have happened to him unless I actually cried out about it, screamed out about it.
Well,
but they're getting ridiculous amounts of money.
What about the revelation today? We know the ABC managing director, who's a lifer, who's just worked in the ABC for his entire life. He's paid over $1 million a year. And their head of news, $600,000 a year.
We can't afford it. And I've been at the government about this to review these and put them on the different grading. It's just unacceptable by the public, and this is what needs to change.
Well, you've got a lot of influence. The government needs your support on so many issues. You refused to vote for them the other day because of issues that we're about to discuss with agriculture, but surely something's got to give at some stage to get the ABC to stop wasting so much money and perhaps being a little bit more honest with Australians.
Chris, I push my point in this parliament, and especially I have with regards to the dairy industry this week. I have got farmers that are desperate, suiciding, walking off their properties, no hope whatsoever. I've taken a stance on this, and I don't take one step back from what I've done, as I did with the sugar growers and the code of conduct at that time, a couple of years ago. And on important issues like this, I will stand my ground and fight for those Australians. And, it's a shame that the Agricultural Minister hasn't done it, because I feel that I'm the de facto Agricultural Minister fighting for the rural and regional Australia on these issues. You know, where are they? You can't see them. And they, you know, to come out and say that I'm fighting for, you know, a regulated dairy industry again. No, I'm fighting for a fair price for the farmers that Australian people want to pay. It's not about the processors, it's not about the supermarkets, it's about keeping an industry that is at the moment becoming unviable, and we're losing that, and we'll start importing milk. So I know I've got the Australian people behind me and the dairy industry that are thankful and grateful for my input into this.
And now, as you say, you withheld your vote for the government's first home loan scheme as a part of this to put pressure on them over the dairy industry. You've now put up a motion to the Senate to establish an inquiry into the dairy sector and to try and look at ways around that. I think the key point here is point D of your motion. Just let me read that, and it says the merits of tasking the ACCC to investigate how it can regulate the price of milk per litre paid by processors to dairy farmers to ensure a viable dairy industry. Now, I agree with you. I think a lot of people in the public would support this. You want to make sure, forget about regulating the total industry, but at the very least, I suppose, there's a minimum price paid to dairy farmers so that their actual industry is viable.
At least it covers production costs, and that the processors can't screw them down, and that's what it's about. It's all right for the minister to come out and say, because she's a Victorian senator as well, that the dairy industry doesn't need it. Well, I'm sorry, in Victoria, the dairy industry doesn't have a code of conduct, where all the other states do. You talk about the dairy industry. On that board, that you actually have... You've got a wealthy Victorian farmer who's got over 2,000 head of cattle. You've got Victorian members on it. You've got one South Australian. There is no representation from Tasmania, Western Australia, New South Wales or Queensland. You can't tell me that's fair representation, because it's not. And Victoria has over 64% of the dairy herds in Australia, while the rest of the states go under. I'm sorry, this needs a full investigation into it, and I won't back down from this. So a lot of things need to be investigated. The dairying farmers pay into this fund $33 million a year. The government puts in another just over $20 million a year. Where does the money go? Over 62% of it we don't know. And I'm paying $4 million a year in rent and costs. So I want to know where the money's going on behalf of the dairy farmers.
Do you know how long it is since the ACCC's had a look at the dairy sector? Because your suggestion here of having them look at the farm gate pricing would seem to be that'd be the obvious people to have a look at this.
It's been a long time since they've had it. There's been a couple of inquiries into it, but I think that we need to get them to have a look at it, and that's why I want to put this before it was passed today, so it will go ahead in the rural and economics, rural and regional areas economics. Yeah.
Well, that motion
so I'm pleased with it. Yeah, it's been passed.
That is, so that parliamentary committee will go ahead, and this investigation will occur, and you'll have a look at getting the ACCC to conduct that investigation.
And I've got my dairy bill up. I've got my private members bill up for the dairy bill, so that's up as well. Again, looking at the price, the cost of milk, and also the code of conduct. So that's another in my private members bill that I got up as well. So I'm hoping to be able to speak to that in November.
For so often, the price of milk was some sort of dumb throwaway question at leaders' debates, but it is very much a live issue now. And as you say, going to the very viability of the industry. Sticking with agriculture, just as we wind up, Pauline Hanson, this additional assistance announced by the Prime Minister today, do you support that? Is it enough for our drought-affected farmers?
Look, to actually give them that extra income on the family income is great. Any help is greatly appreciated. A lot of farmers are very proud, but the whole fact is the cattle they can't keep. They're going to the slaughterhouse or they're shooting the cattle because they can't even transport them because they're in such poor health. What I'd like to see is the time of glut, when we have the grain, we have the lucerne, we have the hay, that the government then buys it from the farmers, puts it in storage. You can put it in the states that we have drought, and that at times of drought that the government then gives it out to the farmers. Don't pay this huge amounts of money for it. It will actually give those farmers an extra income at that time to grow it, and it will stop those people, those shonkies out there, charging farmers huge amount of monies for this feed at the time of drought. So there are things, and of course, the government should be supporting and encouraging farmers to actually put dams on their properties. I understand now that South Australia government is paying farmers to actually fill in their dams. So go figure. This is the country that we're in, and the governments that we have are absolutely idiots in what they're doing and destroying our nation.